Hey guys, thanks for joining us for the December newsletter. Okay, let me get all of this out of the way. Happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and Happy Holidays from all of us here at CNS. We hope everyone is enjoying the holidays with their families this year. This month, we will brush over some of the upcoming DOT and OSHA regulation changes in 2024, some of the differences between CSA scores, roadside violations and audits, FMCSA rules on cell phones or other handheld devices, laws related to marijuana use and testing, and what needs to be done about the major issue with fentanyl. All right, let's get started. At CNS, we hear this statement all the time. I need help fixing my bad scores. What do I do? What a lot of carriers don't understand is that there are different types of scores and they're affected in different ways. I'll give you a quick rundown, but keep an eye out for our next Caution Wide Right podcast episode with Luke Kibbe and Jared Klein. And they're gonna dive deep into the intricacies of these scores. So there are three different types of scores to consider: CSA scores, roadside scores, and audit scores. First of all, let's acknowledge that the FMCSA loves using acronyms, and let's also thank them for making this so difficult to understand that we need to create multiple articles, videos, and podcasts to help people understand them. Can we get a round of applause? All right, so CSA stands for Compliance, Safety, and Accountability, and the scores are really part of the SMS, or Safety Measurement System. These scores are laid out into 7 categories based on the FMCSA's BASIC system. Now, in case you were wondering, BASIC does not just stand for basic. It's anything but that. It stands for Behavioral Analysis and Safety Improvement Categories. And your performance in those categories determines your overall CSA score. The categories include unsafe driving, accidents, compliance with hours of service and hazardous materials, vehicle maintenance, drug or alcohol use, and driver fitness. One of the most important things you need to understand is that you should not be celebrating if you have a high CSA score. You want them to be as low as possible. Now, roadside scores are a totally different thing, but ultimately relate to your CSA scores because if you get a roadside violation, it would affect one of those categories we were just talking about. Your roadside scores are measured by something called an ISS score, or Inspection Selection System. See, I told you they like their acronyms. So, those ISS scores are basically what a DOT officer uses to decide whether they will give you a roadside inspection. The ISS scores go from 1 to 100. A score between 1 and 49 means you will most likely pass without an inspection. 50 to 74 means they have the option of doing an inspection. And 75 to 100 means you better get ready to be inspected. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now let's talk about your audit score. Your audit score is not rated on a number necessarily. It's more of a status outcome, which could be satisfactory, conditional, or unsatisfactory. Now those are pretty self-explanatory. Satisfactory good, unsatisfactory bad. So if you call us and say, "Can you fix my score?" just know that it's not a quick fix. We may have to dig a little bit deeper to understand how bad your scores are, what score needs improvement, and what violation occurred that affected your score. Then we can put a plan together to work on improving the scores. Just be sure to check out the podcast whenever that comes out, and they will discuss how all of those scores are actually calculated and the number of ways that you can lower them. If you have questions or concerns now, you can always call or email us, or just fill out the form below. As you know, there are always big changes with regulations every year.
Yeah, big change.
Now we know they are not all put into play right away, but it is in your best interest to stay up to date with all the proposed changes. We do have a much longer video coming up with our In the Loop with Luke series that will cover these topics in detail, but I will give you a quick rundown. First off, some minor changes that are coming include updates to the return to duty process for drivers with a drug and alcohol violation. UCR fees are expected to increase, and there are still discussions around the California AB5 independent contractor legal battle. Some larger items that will be discussed include big changes to the appeals process for data queues,
Big change.
improving the efficiency of roadside inspections by giving all CMVs an electronic ID, stricter emission standards, and automated driving systems, and there may be a standardized test now for new carriers. That is just calling out a few. Luke is going to go into detail on many more, but we have already discussed several of these throughout 2023. The good thing about all of these is that the FMCSA is an open book, not necessarily because they want to be, but because they have to be. They're required to give the public time to weigh in on a regulatory process before making their final revisions. All you have to do to submit a comment is go to regulations.gov, search the docket number, and click comment. They do review all of these to see common concerns and determine if they are realistic. If you have questions or concerns right now, you can call or email us or just fill out the form below. If you don't remember, we have discussed issues with truck parking in the past, and that discussion was geared towards Florida and Tennessee, but now we're talking about Pennsylvania. There is a shortage of truck parking across the country and now has become apparent along major interstate corridors in Pennsylvania. It is pretty common to see trucks parked on highway shoulders and ramps overnight, which is a significant safety issue. And it really shows you that they need a place to park. There's a lot of available spaces, but there's many townships and councils that are against providing those spaces for truck parking. The numbers are pretty simple. There are around 11,600 truck parking spaces available at Pennsylvania truck stops, rest areas, welcome centers, and service plazas. But during peak hours, there are over 12,000 trucks needing some kind of a parking accommodation. With that said, both state government committees and statewide trucking associations are calling for more help, and a Pennsylvania House committee has taken the first step toward addressing the shortage by conducting a parking study. If you look at this map, you can see where the weak points are. They have estimated that there is a shortage of about 4,400 parking spaces across Pennsylvania, which they estimate leads to around 1,100 trucks parked on the sides of highways on a nightly basis. Ultimately, they want to be able to provide drivers with a safe place to take the required breaks, where they have access to facilities to do basic things like washing their hands and using the bathroom. As a result, the PMTA and American Trucking Associations are pushing Governor Shapiro to prioritize truck parking with infrastructure spending and are reiterating that according to the Department of Transportation, 98% of truck drivers have a difficult time finding truck parking on a regular basis. Whether you are having issues with finding parking for your trucks or you're having issues with audits and DOT compliance, you can always contact one of our CNS specialists by calling or emailing or just filling out the form below. Something that comes up very often is the use of cell phones or handheld devices while driving. We have talked about it so many times, and we're all guilty of looking down or grabbing our phone whenever it dings. Our curiosity gets the better of us, and we really just need to know what someone is saying at that exact moment. Well, as professional drivers, you need to understand the serious consequences that come from handheld device violations. This could include things like texting, managing apps while driving, or even using your ELD. First of all, what is the FMCSA rule on handheld devices? Well, the rule states two things. One, no driver is allowed to use a handheld mobile phone while driving a CMV. And two, no motor carrier can allow or require its drivers to use a handheld mobile phone while driving a CMV. If you've gotten a violation for a handheld device or just have questions, our DOT compliance team can answer any questions you have. Just call or email us or fill out the form below. There are some definitions related to using a handheld device, but I won't go into all those details right now. Just check the article for those specifics. More or less, you should not be holding it in your hand, dialing numbers or texting, and it needs to be mounted safely within reach if you need to answer the phone. In other words, you can't be reaching across the cab to grab or answer your phone. Now, the fines and penalties are hefty, so think twice before you start texting or pick up your phone. Fines for drivers can go up to $2,750, and fines for employers can go up to $11,000. Initially, you would just be getting a fine, but if you get a second and a third violation, you are looking at a 60 and 120-day disqualification. In addition to being disqualified and getting fines, you're looking at long-term effects on your CSA scores, which, as you know, affects your insurance rates, your chances of getting roadside inspections, client retention, since the general public can see your CSA scores, and hiring and retaining drivers. Let's talk real quick about how you can stay in compliance with the handheld rule. As I mentioned, you need to have your phone mounted in a safe place that can be reached easily while wearing a seatbelt. A few other tips include using an earpiece or speakerphone to talk, using voice-activated dialing, or using the hands-free features like Google Assistant. If you have questions about handheld devices or just need an insurance quote for any state that we write in, you can call or email us or fill out the form below. So, I doubt you remember, but at the beginning of 2023, we were talking about brokers and freight forwarders and 5 areas that the FMCSA was proposing changes to that would hopefully reduce some of the issues we have with these dishonest brokers. Just in case it slipped your mind, we will throw these up on the screen for you just to refresh your memory. Don't worry though, I'll go over them in a little more detail later. As far as those dishonest brokers go, it has been a long-standing issue where brokers will withhold payment from motor carriers without good reason. This was then leading motor carriers to submit claims to receive payment, and when the claims against an individual broker exceed $75,000, the financial responsibility provider will then submit the claims to a court to determine how to distribute the funds. Now, this is a very time-consuming and costly process for motor carriers, and it can lead them to being paid pro rata or prorated, which unfortunately means they are not getting their full payment. So, with these changes, which are now official, motor carriers will be more protected. But let's cover each of these areas real quick. Number 1, assets are readily available. Now, the rule requires brokers or freight forwarders to meet the MAP 21 requirement to have assets readily available, which will be done by maintaining trusts that meet certain criteria. A list of acceptable asset types that a BMC 85 trust may contain include cash, ILCs issued by a federally insured depository institution, and treasury bonds. Number 2, immediate suspension of broker or freight forwarder operating authority. The final rule will allow the FMCSA to suspend the operating authority registration of a broker or freight forwarder when its available financial security falls below $75,000. Number 3, surety or trust responsibilities with broker or forwarder failure or insolvency. The rule will require that if the trustee becomes aware that a broker or freight forwarder is experiencing financial failure, it has to notify the FMCSA and initiate cancellation of the financial responsibility. Number 4, enforcement authority. This rule implements the MAP 21 requirements around suspension of a trust fund provider's authority under certain circumstances. But ultimately, the FMCSA will follow the procedure of providing a notice of suspension, giving a 30-day response time to the trust fund provider, and applying any fines or penalties to those that violate the new requirements. And lastly, number 5, entities eligible to provide trust funds for BMC 85 filings. The FMCSA is removing loan and finance companies from the list of providers eligible to serve as a BMC 85 trustee. The reason behind this is that they are not subject to the rigorous federal and state regulations that apply to chartered depository institutions or insurance companies. There are a lot more details to the changes in these 5 areas, so we will add the link to the full article below for your review. If you have any questions or are interested in a quote, you can call or email us or fill out the form below and we can help you out. In early November, SAMHSA published a notice in the Federal Register announcing that their Drug Testing Advisory Board will discuss adding fentanyl to the drug testing table in December. First of all, what is fentanyl? Fentanyl is an approved painkiller and it's used to treat severe pain. The problem is that it's being produced illegally and it's largely coming into the US from Mexico. The drug can be up to 100 times more powerful than morphine. Now, what does that feel like? Well, I'm imagining that it's probably something like that scene in Wolf of Wall Street when Leonardo DiCaprio and Jonah Hill take like 5 Quaaludes each. Okay, maybe not exactly, but yeah, it's some serious stuff. So because it's being produced illegally, it's being found in street drugs like heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamines pretty regularly. Overdose is a huge issue and a serious concern with fentanyl. The drug can increase the release of dopamine and slow breathing, which substantially increases the chance of an overdose. When considering drug tests, fentanyl will usually show up in a urine test between 24 and 72 hours after the last use, a hair test for up to 3 months, and blood tests between 5 and 48 hours after use. So, taking all of that into consideration and the fact that we've been dealing with an opioid crisis since the late 90s, you can probably understand the concern here. If you don't know the stats on the opioid crisis, the CDC reported that from 1999 to 2014, opioid prescriptions as well as opioid-related overdoses nearly quadrupled. In 2017, 64,000 Americans died from an opioid overdose. Pennsylvania has even just recently legalized the use of fentanyl test strips to reduce overdose deaths because there are so many people buying recreational drugs that is laced with fentanyl. Just so you know, this is not official yet and it is currently open for public comments. Just check out the full article in the description below for information on how to submit your comments. If you have any questions, you can call or email us or just fill out the form below and a CNS occupational healthcare specialist will help you out. Ohio recently legalized the use of that sticky icky, that purple haze, that wacky tobacco. You know what I'm talking about. They legalized the use of recreational marijuana. All right! Excuse me for a second, I gotta call my wife.
Hello there.
Hey, can you start packing up our stuff? We're moving to Ohio.
What?
Is that cool?
No.
Well, they just legalized marijuana.
Oh!
I know, right? All right, cool. We'll leave as soon as I get home. All right, bye. Okay, now that I got that taken care of, let's talk about how this affects businesses. So, now that marijuana is being legalized, it's affecting businesses in the same way that alcohol is. Since people over the age of 21 can purchase and use it, there will likely be even more people partaking and smoking that dang, that hay, that reefer, the ganja, the dope, that Mary Jane. Because more people are smoking it, it could present potential problems in a workplace since more people will likely be abusing it. Because of that, it is important that employers get their drug policies in order because the new law does have some things in place that protect the employer. For example, employers don't have to accommodate an employee's use of marijuana, and they're even allowed to fire them or refuse to hire them based on their use of it. Again, it's just like alcohol now. Your employees can drink it at home, but they have to leave it at home. The biggest thing for most businesses is balancing the need for a safe and productive environment with employees' rights. Having your employee handbook up to date could save you a lot of legal fees down the road. You could even add in a clause letting employees know that, no, you cannot ask your mom to make all of your work friends some special brownies. Like the kind that's gonna get you higher than a hippie in a helicopter. Yeah, that kind. So employers taking this approach is kind of the same defense as me saying, oh, I don't know, putting up a beware of dog sign. The sign is there and you were warned. But hey, if you decide you wanna come on my property anyways and you get bit, that's your fault. And the last thing to mention is that restrictions on marijuana use in specific public places is still prohibited. So don't just run down to your local high school and spark one up. And definitely don't jump in your car after dancing with the devil. You can still get hit with a DUI. If you don't know where to start, you can always give us a call or email us, or just fill out the form below and we'll be happy to help. Now, if you'll excuse me, gotta start packing for my move to Ohio. Do you ever dream of the day when you'll be able to smoke that sweet, sweet Chiba on the weekend and not have to worry about getting drug tested on Monday morning? Well, for many Californians, that dream will become a reality on January 1st, 2024. And Minnesota and Colorado may be right behind. Employees in California will now gain more protection if they are part of the group that uses marijuana while off the job. So the bill is basically saying the employer is not allowed to discriminate, terminate, or penalize an employee if the employee's use of cannabis is off the job, or the employer-required drug screening is found positive for non-psychoactive cannabis metabolites. It's probably going to end up being like a game of Find the Stoner at work. Kind of like that old Whack-A-Mole arcade game. You remember that? The moles keep popping their heads up and you gotta whack them on the head. Basically what I'm saying is that everyone is gonna be high and the employer is just gonna have to be quick enough and smart enough to catch them in the act. But the problem for employers is that they can only catch them in a certain way. saliva tests, breathalyzer tests, and blood tests. The days of secretly snipping an employee's hair or randomly asking them to pee in a cup are gone. That's right, employers are not allowed to do hair or urine drug tests. Any drug test conducted needs to gauge current impairment, not past cannabis use. As far as DOT drug tests and any other federally regulated industry or safety-sensitive positions, the federal regulations trump state regulations, so employers can still use urine drug tests just like they have been. The most important thing for employers to understand here is that they need to update their drug testing policies to cover these changes. Managing drug testing and safety policies does involve a good understanding of things like specimen types, procedures, ADA considerations, consequences, what jobs would be considered safety sensitive, and many other things that should be considered in a good workplace safety plan. Our occupational healthcare specialists are more than capable of building a tailored safety plan for you or just helping to update your current policy. For more information, you can call or email us or just fill out the form below and a CNS occupational healthcare specialist will help you out. Well, that's it for this month. I hope you learned something. If you ever have questions, just give us a shout and we're happy to help you. See you next month.